You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible Study for the 21st Century. Hello friends, Jim Cantelon here. Well, a new year has begun. I'm sure we're already wondering about those New Year's resolutions we made. It's amazing how fervent we can be at the end of the year, and then as the new year begins, we realize that there are some things just not sustainable. Anyway, all the best with your resolutions. We are just about to get into the second chapter of the Gospel of John. And it's a slow go, but it's a good one. And I hope you're enjoying it. We'll be back right after this.
WOW! Working for Orphans and Widows is a trusted Christian charity reaching out to the sick and the dying, the least of these in pandemic-stricken Africa and India. For over 22 years, Jim and Kathy Cantelon have engaged with community-based champions and church volunteers in the care for those whom Jim calls society's weakest link. Everything from home-based palliative care to the rescue and protection of young women and girls who are victims of abuse is done in the name of Jesus and is overseen by local partner champions and an army of church-based volunteers. WOW has a proven track record. Check it out on wowmission.com, or if you wish, you can call or write to us. Its sustainability is dependent on the support of faithful friends like you.
So friends, we just started the Gospel of John in the last few weeks previous to Christmas. And I said at that time when introducing the Gospel of John that it's really quite a unique gospel in the sense that it's not like Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the synoptic gospels, meaning there's a certain synergy between the three of them. Probably Mark being the first to write his history of the life of Christ, and then Matthew and Luke really blending in with what Mark had recorded, but also what, in Matthew's case, he had experienced, and in Luke's case, as an historian, what he had researched. Luke not being a part of that inner group of disciples who walked with Jesus for those 3 years in his ministry, but a very excellent historian, very talented in Greek language, and wrote that marvelous Gospel of Luke, and the second volume of Luke as being known to us as the book of Acts. But now we're into John, and John, he's one of the disciples, probably the youngest, had a fairly high view of himself. He figured that he was at least the one disciple that Jesus had a special inkling for. But nevertheless, he's writing this gospel now as an old man. He's matured a lot. He's reflecting on his experience and ministering with Jesus. He's looking back, but he's very insightful in terms of his reminiscences. And he's probably writing from Ephesus. He did not write the book of Revelation until he had been exiled to the Isle of Patmos many years later. So the thing that really characterizes the Gospel of John, it's one reason why new believers are often encouraged to study John first, is that it's really strong on the love of God, God being love, and his heart for the world, his heart for you and me. In that sense, it's a very personal gospel, and it has a kind of a special, almost intimate flavor to it. At the same time, John, I think, he'd been exposed to some fairly good education. When you read the first few verses of John, he's almost philosophical when he talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by Him. Without the Word being logos, which was a current buzzword, if you will, in Greek philosophy, but it has so many not just philosophical but also theological ramifications as far as John is concerned. But then he shifts into talking about John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. This is all in the first chapter. And he starts choosing disciples, some of the first being transition, if you will, from John the Baptist to Jesus of Nazareth. And then as we finished the chapter last time, he was calling Philip and Nathaniel to be disciples. But now John shifts, gears. We don't know what the gap of time is, several days at least, if not a few weeks. But he picks it up, and in fact, let's just read it here. John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They've got no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. You've saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Now, let's just, take our time with this. This is a very interesting narrative from John. The wedding in Cana. Cana, by the way, there's 2 potential Canas, both east of Capernaum and north of Nazareth. The current Cana in modern-day Israel is one. And another is a bit more of an obscure spot, which some scholars think was maybe the Cana at the time. There's no need to spend any time trying to determine where the location was. I'm just letting you know that there is some discussion about that. But Cana was Nathaniel, one of the first disciples, was Nathaniel's hometown. And this event may have been a family event. Why else would Jesus' mother, Mary, 6 of Jesus' new friends, Andrew, Peter, Philip, James, John, and Nathaniel, have been invited? Some commentators have suggested that it was the Apostle John's wedding. Maybe, who knows? Interestingly, it could have been in the sense that John's mother was Salome, who was the wife of Zebedee, and you know that James and John were the sons of Zebedee, also called the sons of thunder a little later on, fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. And Salome was Mary's sister. Jesus' mother Mary had a sister named Salome. And so a family wedding, if these assertions are true, it might have been. I see no reason why not, because Mary was vitally involved. It was like she was running about, making sure everything was organized, and she seems to have taken personally the embarrassment of running out of wine at such an auspicious family event, and so she turns to Jesus for help. Now, John doesn't tell us why she even did this. Did she have insight already as to who Jesus was? I mean, going right back to the announcement of his conception, she certainly realized that Jesus was very special. Maybe this was a kind of a trigger event. Okay, Jesus, time for you to start, revealing yourself as the Son of God. I mean, he's 30 years old at this point. We don't know. We speculate. But Anyway, she turns to Jesus for help. Now, a lot of readers over the centuries have taken umbrage with Jesus' response to his mother. It seems kind of harsh, Woman, what have I to do with thee? But let's keep things in perspective here, culturally as well as historically. In Jesus' day, it was not a rebuke to refer to a woman as a woman. A woman, it's like saying sir or ma'am, all right? We might say ma'am, although that's not that common these days. It certainly still is in Britain. But again and again, he addressed women this way. For example, the Canaanite woman in Lebanon, we read about that a long time ago in Matthew 15. The woman with the issue of blood, we read about that in Luke chapter 13. The Samaritan woman at the well, we will be reading about that in the next, if not today, in the next few programs. He refers to the woman caught in adultery as woman. To Mary on the cross when he was dying, woman. Mary Magdalene, he's woman. Okay, so it's ma'am or miss or whatever. It's not an offensive term. Let's put it that way. The second part of his response, what have I to do with you? What have I to do with thee, as the King James Version puts it? My hour has not yet come, is not impetuous, but it's revealing. Already, Jesus was facing the great gulf between the immediate demands of the people and his mission to usher in the kingdom of heaven. It really was a clash of worldview. And it wasn't just Mary, but over the next 3 years, his chosen 12 would continually, yet unintentionally, try to reduce Jesus to their size. I've talked many times in the past, as we've gone through the Gospels, about their expectation that Jesus would establish the kingdom in Jerusalem, that he'd have a throne in Jerusalem, that he would rule the world from Jerusalem, and they, the 12, would be his cabinet. That was their expectation. I mean, Messiah to them meant king of the world. They weren't thinking in any broader context or anything beyond, their current expectation of the end of days. So, whether it was wine or a throne in Jerusalem, the people's vision was myopic. But there must have been a tender tone in his voice as he responds to his mother, because Mary just, unabashed, confident, turns to the waiter and says, do whatever he tells you. So this obviously was not an in-your-face confrontation or exchange of tone between Jesus and his mother. It was something that just simply indicated to Mary, okay, he got my message. It's going to happen. And boy, did it ever happen. We'll get to that right after this break.
For over 20 years, WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, has been caring for vulnerable and at-risk women and children hard hit by the HIV and AIDS pandemic in Africa and India. WOW engages with local partner champions and church-based volunteers in the care of the desperately needy. Now, in recent months, we have expanded our reach to Ukraine. Over 8 million refugees have fled the ravages of that war-torn country, mostly women and children, including many orphans. Our partner in East Europe tells us of the busing of Ukrainian orphans through the night to safety. Churches have become refugee centers, opening their buildings to become safe havens in the rescue. And WOW has come alongside. We have begun supporting this rescue work, but there is so much more that we must provide to these heroic churches. They need funding to continue for hundreds of orphans yet to come. We may be only small players, but you can partner with us in the rescue of Ukrainian orphans. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
So, Jesus and Mary have this little repartee. If there was any tone at all, I think it was tenderness on the part of Jesus to his mother. Why wouldn't there be tenderness? Why else would she be so confident to say to the servants, just do what he tells you. Everything's cool, right? So, as a favor to his mother, perhaps, I can't see any other better reason. Jesus performs what John calls the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. That's in verse 11. His newly minted disciples, there were just 6 of them at this point in time, were absolutely pumped by this because he's starting to do it. You know, we weren't wrong. We left our nets in the Sea of Galilee to follow this guy, and we weren't wrong because look what he's just done. So they're all encouraged. And I think in gratitude, Mary and her other sons, brothers of Jesus, half-brothers of Jesus, accepted his invitation to come and visit with him in Capernaum for a few days. And I've pointed this out in the past as we've been going through the other Gospels. Jesus, even though he was born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, really adopted Capernaum as his hometown, and he probably boarded with Peter in Peter's family home that was overseen by his mother-in-law. We don't have any record of Peter's father being around. Maybe he died, we don't know, but this was Jesus' home away from home, if you will, in Capernaum. So he invites Mary and his brothers to come and join him there, and they accept the invitation. I think it must have been a long conversation on the way down. And I say down because from either of the Cana locations that I referred to in the last segment, it is a trek down from a kind of a mountain ridge down to the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum is perched right on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And I mean, I've driven that route so many times, you know, in the years that I pastored in Jerusalem, and I would go up to southern Lebanon every week to do a couple of shifts with a radio station up there in a war zone. So I drove this route. I mean, I could almost do it in my sleep. And when you're up on the ridge, you're a good, 400 or 500, maybe 600 feet above the level of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is well below you as you look down across to Mount Hermon on the north. And it's so low, actually, the climate there around the lake and in Tiberias, the beautiful Israeli city, is subtropical. I've been there sometimes in the summertime, and it's just, you're almost perishing with the heat. It's hot enough in Israel generally, apart from the wintertime, but at the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, you have the heat, the compression, if you will, of being way down low in the subtropical zone, and it's humid and hot. Man, is it hot. Anyway, they would walk down. You know, you read these passages, and we tend to think in terms of proximity, like we do, you know, get on an airplane and you're there in an hour or two, or get in a car and you're there in an hour, whatever. They were walking. And they were walking through that heat and that dust and the downhill slope, the stones, the brambles, you know, it's very elemental, if you will, in that sense. So they go down to Capernaum just to spend a little time with Jesus there. Okay, so now let me just check here my Bible. Okay. Let's pick it up in verse 13. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables, exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle, scattered the coins of the money changers, overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It's taken 46 years to build this temple. You're going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He didn't need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. Now, that's a very interesting comment from John there. Throughout this, series of programs, and also for those of you who have picked up my book, Cantelon's Casual Commentary, I'll show you a copy of it later. I've made it very clear that I have no interest in trying to do what many have tried to do, and that is to harmonize the Gospels. Mainly because it can't be done. Each of the 4 writers have their own perspective, and to use an analogy, they play different instruments of the symphony, different notes. And I approach, so what I do is I approach each work in its own right, occasionally cross-referencing, but never insisting that it's part of a collaborative effort. Nor will I assume that historical chronology was a value of the writers. The one value that they all shared was Messiah. Jesus is the Son of Man and Son of God, the Savior of the world. And that to me is really the key component. But the 4 Gospels are not the product of a committee of writers sitting down, comparing notes and saying, well, let's make sure we're on the same page here. I say that because unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, John's account of Jesus clearing the temple courts occurs early on in his ministry. And as required by the law of Moses, Jesus and his disciples were in Jerusalem for the Passover celebrations. Every man in Israel was required to go up to Jerusalem at least 3 times, for Passover, for Pentecost, and for the Feast of Tabernacles. So here's Passover. And the epicenter of this huge event, and I do mean huge, was the temple. There were at least 100,000 pilgrims there, maybe more, circulating around. The temple courts are bursting with activity. And the temple courts, if I can use a kind of an analogy that we can relate to, was sort of like a mall in the sense that the temple itself was relatively small compared to the courts that surrounded it, like in a mall, you've got, your number 1 or 2 major stores that attract most of the customers. And then you've got the smaller stores that, are there hoping that those who come in for the bigger stuff will also come their way. And then you've got the walkways around it, and then you've got the parking lot outside of it. And the temple courts were kind of like that. And so when you've got 100,000 plus people there, you've got a major marketplace. And people being people and wanting to make a buck, the entrepreneurial spirit at work, there were all kinds of kiosks, shops. You can be sure people were advertising. There are people everywhere. It was noisy. It was just flooded with activity. This was the situation here. So Jesus was incensed at this. Why? Because even the courts were a part of his Father's house. And he'd shown anger before. We see it again and again in the Gospels. And in this case, he snatches some of the leather thongs that were used by the cattle drivers. He twisted them into a whip and began swinging it wildly at the sheep, the oxen, the cattle, the drovers, the merchants, anything and everything that got in his way, shouting, "Get these out of here! Stop turning my Father's house into a market." And if you have kind of bought into, the stereotypical misrepresentation of Jesus meek and mild, this is a bit of a shock to you. In fact, some people are offended by this. They don't like to see an angry Jesus. They don't like to see, his blood rising and striking out at people, but that's exactly what it is. This was a violent scene. Tables being overturned, animals scattering money and other stuff, clattering down the cobblestones, people running, maybe some even panicking. It was, as we say in modern Hebrew, it was balagan, total confusion, total upset. And Jesus was the source of it. So he really could have been arrested, but no one dared arrest him. Sometimes with this program, I'm a little frustrated because I wish I could just carry on, but the time being what it is and television being what it is, I'm going to have to call it there. But our next program, I'll pick it up in the midst of the dust and the detritus and all that's going on in the Temple Mount, in the Temple precinct, as Jesus is chasing everybody out of there. So we'll take a little break and I'll be back to close right after this.
Wow! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partner champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and President Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Jim Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
So friends, you see WOW promoted on JCT, Working for Orphans and Widows. This is a ministry that my wife and I started 22 years ago. We've been at it now all of those years, a couple decades, into our third, all for the sake of dying orphans and widows in sub-Saharan Africa and now also in India. And on top of that, we've been very involved with orphans and widows in Ukraine since Putin's war began 10 months ago. When you support WOW, you're supporting JCT because JCT is the official voice of WOW. With JCT, we teach the Gospels. With WOW, we try to live the Gospels, both righteousness and justice. It's a biblical paradigm, and it's something that I would really encourage you to support if you haven't considered doing it. The coordinates are there, and you can just respond accordingly. But I want you to know that together, we're making a difference in this world. Thanks for watching. See you next time.